Greetings, everyone. Today, our goal is to lay down sound interpretive foundations for understanding this challenging and often misunderstood book. Let's start by asking, why does interpretation, why hermeneutics, matter so much? To answer, consider this. The way we interpret a text doesn't just shape our minds, it shapes our lives. It affects how we think, how we act, and how we relate to God and the world. And the book of Revelation, filled with vivid symbols and striking imagery, is perhaps the most demanding test of our interpretive skills in all of Scripture. The book of Revelation is just like a large, uncharted landscape, full of terrain that can dazzle and disorient. The key to not getting lost is to locate and trust what I call inviolable landmarks, fixed points in the text that guide our interpretation, keeping us on course. The first and perhaps most critical of those landmarks is the date of the book's writing. Most traditional teaching and many church fathers place Revelation around 95 AD during the reign of Emperor Domitian, but growing evidence both inside and outside the text points to a much earlier date, around 65 AD under Nero's persecution. This debate is far from a technicality, it's foundational, and here's why. If Revelation was written before 70 AD, it speaks directly to the shattering events unfolding in that generation. If it was written after, it speaks to different crises, perhaps different audiences altogether. How do we know? The internal evidence is powerful. For instance, in Revelation chapter 11, verses 1 and 2, John is commanded, "Rise and measure the temple of God and the altar, but do not measure the court outside, for it is given over to the nations." Notice the tense. The temple is standing. If Revelation was written after 70 AD, when the temple lay in ruins, this instruction would make little sense. External evidence also adds weight. While some early Christian writers reference Domitian, their accounts appear decades later and often echo one another without specificity. The persecutions described in Revelation fit Nero's chaotic violence far better than Domitian's somewhat later rule. Let's pause and let that sink in. If this book was written in the 60s AD, its urgency wasn't just spiritual, it was literal. The prophesied events were, in many cases, about to break upon John's own generation. I consider the 6 interrogatives our methodological compass. Let's apply the classic 6 questions: who, what, where, when, why, and how to Revelation's opening verses. Let's take them one at a time. Who is involved? Revelation 1 tells us clearly, God is the source, Jesus Christ the central subject, an angel the heavenly messenger, John the human recorder, and the 7 churches, their leaders and members, are the initial audience. These aren't metaphors. The 7 churches are real places: Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea, each with its own unique context. What is being addressed? The book's content deals with things that must shortly take place. That phrase, along with "for the time is near," sets a tone of immediacy. We shouldn't treat these time markers as vague theological flourishes. They spoke to events pressing in on the book's first readers. Where? Asia Minor is the immediate setting for the churches, now Western Turkey. But the narrative draws us again and again to Jerusalem, the heart of Jewish faith and conflict, especially as events unfold. When? Revelation starts and ends with urgency. Events are to unfold soon, without delay. This theme is woven into every vision and oracle. Why? The book's driving motive is to sustain and steady communities under threat. These persecuted believers needed assurance. Their suffering was understood, and God's justice was about to break through. How? Revelation's vehicle is prophetic vision, a divine unveiling full of rich Old Testament imagery, seen with both poetic and historical realism. John stands in the tradition of Daniel and Ezekiel, interpreting contemporary events in apocalyptic terms. Pause and consider. Who does John write to? What is at stake? Where and when do these events occur? Why would the first century church need this message? How does John communicate it? These questions anchor us in reality. We must consider the synoptic connection, Revelation, and Jesus' prophecy. Now let's turn to a crucial cross-reference, Matthew 24, often called the Olivet Discourse. Jesus' words here are essential for understanding John's vision. In Revelation 1:7, we hear, "Behold, he comes with the clouds, and every eye will see him, even those who pierced him, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn because of him." Compare this with Matthew 24:30. "Then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory." What's pivotal? Verse 34 of Matthew 24. "Truly, I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place." Jesus sets a temporal boundary, one generation. Any reading that extends fulfillment thousands of years into the future collides with this plain statement. Both texts use cosmic and judgment language, but in the Old Testament, such language always announced dramatic historical upheavals, not the literal collapse of the universe. Isaiah uses the darkening of sun and stars to describe Babylon's fall. Ezekiel employs similar imagery for Egypt. The audience would be primed to interpret these cosmic metaphors as pointers to political and theological earthquakes. Let's explore the famous four horsemen of Revelation 6: conquest, war, famine, and death. Under a preterist reading, these visions map directly onto the events of the Jewish war with Rome from 66 to 70 AD, the white horse, Roman military dominance and conquest, the red horse, civil strife, bloody conflict both within Judea and from invading legions. The black horse, the famine, especially during the sieges. Josephus, the Jewish historian, recounts starvation of unthinkable severity. That the pale horse, or death through all the means above. And then comes the fifth seal, souls beneath the altar, martyrs crying out, "How long, O Lord?" They're told to wait a little while longer, not centuries, not millennia. In biblical Greek, a little while means just that, an imminent brief span. Now look at Revelation 11. Here, the holy city is given over for 42 months. That's 3.5 years, matching the period chronicled by Josephus as the Roman siege of Jerusalem. 6 verses later, John leaves no ambiguity in verse 8. Their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city that symbolically is called Sodom, and Egypt, where their Lord was crucified. The reference can only be to Jerusalem. No fair reading places the crucifixion elsewhere. This is a vital geographical anchor, one that cannot be reinterpreted as Rome or some other city. Is Babylon the Great, Rome, or Jerusalem? Few questions in Revelation stir more debate than the identity of Babylon the Great in chapters 17 and 18. Tradition often identifies Babylon as Rome, but take a careful look at what the text says. Revelation asserts repeatedly that Babylon is guilty of the blood of prophets and saints and apostles, a charge Jesus levels at Jerusalem. Recall Luke 13:33, "For it cannot be that a prophet should perish outside Jerusalem." And Matthew 23:35 to 37 records Jesus weeping and declaring, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her." If the apostolic era ended in the 1st century, and if biblical prophets disappeared with the close of the canon, then Rome simply cannot be Babylon in this context. The true referent is Jerusalem, standing at the crossroads of prophetic destiny and judgment. Do not ignore the temporal framework, understanding soon and near. Let's draw back and see the pattern that pulses through Revelation over and over like a drum beat. Chapter 1, verse 1, things that must shortly take place. Verse 3, the time is near. 6:11, a little while longer. 10:6, no longer any delay. And in the final chapter, behold, I am coming soon. In the biblical text, these terms mean what they say. They are not metaphysical statements about God's view of time. They are concrete signals for the first readers. If we ignore them, we risk unmooring the entire message. Addressing a common objection, some propose that soon on God's clock could mean thousands of years. But Scripture, when speaking pastorally and prophetically to living people, uses these time markers plainly and directly. There are also the hermeneutical principles, or 5 pillars for reading Revelation. Let's now gather our findings as 5 guiding principles for interpreting the book. 1. Take the text literally, unless symbolism is unmistakable. Not everything is a mystery. Many places and numbers are entirely plain. 2. Keep audience relevance central. John was writing to first century Christians facing real crises. Their hope, their fears demanded a message for their time. 3. Remain consistent in interpreting time statements. Don't dodge or redefine soon, near, or this generation to suit our preferences. 4. Read Revelation in the context of the whole Bible. Every vision, every beast, every trumpet echoes an Old Testament precedent. Daniel, Ezekiel, Isaiah, Jeremiah. Intertextual awareness is vital. 5. Understand prophetic and apocalyptic genre. Cosmic language is used for world-shaking historical changes, especially judgments upon Israel, Babylon, Egypt, and other nations. Addressing objections. Let's respond to possible challenges. First, why would John write to churches in Asia Minor about Jerusalem? Because those churches had deep ties to the Jewish faith and to Jerusalem. The fall of the temple would upend their world, liturgically, theologically, and relationally. The old covenant was ending, the new was open for all nations. Second, isn't Revelation's language too grand for first century events? Not at all. Old Testament literature provides the precedent. When nations fell, the prophets spoke as if the sun, moon, and stars were falling too. The symbolic resonance matches the historical reality. Third, what about the Antichrist and the millennium? The preterist view holds that the tribulations predicted by Jesus and John found their primary fulfillment in the first century, leaving the door open for hope, but not bound to impending catastrophe. Are there implications for the church today? Let's step back and see what's at stake. If the preterist reading is correct, most end times events are in the past, a completed chapter of redemptive history. The church stands not on the edge of tribulation, but in the light of redemption accomplished. The word of prophecy is proven trustworthy. The confidence of believers rests on a God who fulfills his promises precisely and faithfully. Revelation, once anchored in its internal and historical landmarks, the dating, the geography, the urgent time frame, becomes not a puzzle or a riddle, but a radiant witness to God's justice, grace, and care. It is a comfort, not a code, a testimony, not a terror. Next video, we will journey into Revelation chapters 4 and 5, exploring the dramatic throne room scene and considering why the message was delivered to the churches of Asia rather than directly to Jerusalem. For your assignment, read Josephus' account of the Jewish war, especially his narration of the 42-month siege. Compare it closely with Revelation 11:1 through 2. Then study the temporal language in Daniel 12:4 and 9, where Daniel is told to seal up his vision for the distant future, and compare this with Revelation 22:10, in which John is told not to seal up his prophecy because the time is near. Reflect on the implications of this difference. How does it shape your view of prophecy and the unfolding of God's promises? Thank you for your attention, your focus, and your willingness to journey deep into the text. Let's open the floor for your questions.